Good morning, Athens, and welcome to Education Matters, the official voice of youth. Education Matters is sponsored by Allison's Professional Services and your local internet station, NEU Radio Athens. You can check it out at neuradioathens.com. My name is Fadrell Green, and joining me are my co-hosts,
Joshua Henderson,
Bound Green,
Kyson Vaughn,
Samaya Stone.
Today on Education Matters, we have our special guest, Melvin Robinson, who will be talking about the concept of the student athlete. But before we start today's show, we will have Joshua Henderson with our words to grow on.
the words of ground for this week are, it does not matter how slowly you go, as long as you do not stop, by Confucius.
Thank you, Josh. How are you doing today, Mr. Robinson?
doing quite well today. Glad and honored for you all to invite me, and looking forward to an exceptional conversation this afternoon.
To start off the first segment, tell us a little bit about where you're from and your educational background.
I'm born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina. Attended Clemson University. I'm a double tiger with a bachelor's in mathematics education and a master's in higher ed student affairs. I was accepted at Clemson in 1993 in civil engineering, and after 2 years of math and science and thermodynamics, my older brother, who happens to be a chemical engineer, talked me out of the engineering field. He told me that I love people so very much that I would be completely bored in an office, in a cubicle. And at that time, being all region student athlete, and at Clemson University, I wanted to give back, whether that would be education or coaching. So I found that out at Clemson and pursued that for 20 plus years as an adult.
You spoke on being an all-region athlete. Could you give us a rundown of your past in athletics?
Well, baseball was my love. I was a better baseball player than anything else. Like I said, I played catcher on big games. I was a captain on any team I played on, setting the lineup, setting the defense, calling the pitches. And then lower level conference games, I played first base. Just my voice in the field, they really wanted me to have my voice in the field. So those were my two primary positions. And in summer travel ball, I played right field. So I have a very strong arm. So most kids got around late, so they hit the ball right field. I would come up firing, throwing folks out.
Where'd you get your work ethic from?
Well, my dad is a Marine. So he's a Vietnam vet. He was a Marine, so we had a lot of order in our house. My mom was a mail lady, so she knew to get up, and believe me, in our house, rain, sleet, or snow, it existed. You had to move, you had to be at the ready. My dad always said when his boots hit the floor in the morning, I was one of 3 boys, we all had to be moving. And again, I was blessed to have a mother and a father in the home, and my mom always supported my dad. So that made it worthwhile.
How would you say your background in athletics kind of sculpted to where your career has been and in terms of jobs you've held? Because your resume is stacked with athletic, with assistant athletic director jobs and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, I've been a part of a team since I was 6 years old. So my mom was my first coach, Little League Baseball. Moved up the ranks. My dad started coaching us. I've always had really good coaches. I've been around really good people. High school coaches, Hall of Fame coaches. And then when I got to college and I found out that I wasn't that good to play at the college level, I was still able to be involved in athletics from a player development level. So again, and especially in intramural. So I've always been a part of athletics. It's been a part of my fabric, but education was the portal to get to those points. So it's interesting that your show is called Education Matters, because that was the crux of how we were raised.
Did you ever think about pursuing a career in baseball or maybe being a mathematician since you were so good at both of them?
Yep, that was a hope and dream. So in 1991, 1992, when the Rockies and the Florida Marlins, they were the next expansion teams in Major League Baseball, and had a couple tryouts with scouts, but again, I was very thin, I thought a lot of myself, and when you're trying to get to the next level, when you're trying to have some long-term success, you first have to be humble. Your work ethic has to run parallel with your ability to be humble, and I had to learn that lesson the hard way. It's funny, before the show started, a lot of you all talked about the disconnect between generations, and being raised in the 80s and the 90s. We had to learn the hard way. Following the generations of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and 90s, you had to learn the hard way. And there were several times I was hard-headed because I thought I knew it all. And I look back at it now and I had some missed opportunities. As far as the educational piece, I was able to give back after my stint at Maryland, University of Maryland. I was player development academic advisor for the men's basketball team at the University of Maryland, where we won a national championship in 2002. Prior to that, I went to the Final Four in 2008. I was 25 years old, and I knew I would say I cheated life in terms of I had early success. And I had enough gumption about myself to say, hey, I need to give back. So I started to use that math degree, and I started teaching Algebra 1, Algebra 2, trigonometry, pre-calculus, honors geometry, honors algebra. I was disciplinary chair. I got promoted to administration early, within 3 years, and moved to a middle school where I was the math department chair. Prior to that, I was coaching, and I coached football, baseball, and basketball. Success has been surrounded my life for a very long time.
Tell me what, when it came to interacting with kids, when it came to coaching and teaching and all of that, how did your experiences personally help with those occupations?
Well, how can I say this? The coaches I had were so impactful in my life. I had enough sense to recognize that early, and I had enough sense to be mentored by them, to receive their coaching tips. Had enough sense to appreciate their time, their talent, and even their ties. And a lot of times we don't cross our faith with our work. So when I say ties, those coaches that give so much to youth sports, those coaches that give so much to high school sports, they're not getting paid like college and pro coaches get paid. So they're giving their tithes. So in church, the pastor say it's tithes and offering time, and you have to give your tithes, your first fruits, your 10%. Well, those youth coaches, I look back on it, they gave more than 10%, and I don't remember them asking for anything back. Just listen and learn. So I was able to, as best I could, listen and learn while they taught us. And that was so impactful in my life. Again, my dad was one of my coaches, but he trusted other men around us to coach us as well, to encourage us.
It's funny how you mentioned trying to give back. When I was looking through your background, the same school you graduated from in college, where you got your degrees and everything, you came back, you were a math advisor for the basketball team and track team at Clemson. Tell me, what was it like, coming back to the school you graduated from and working there and giving back to the school?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, and you taking me down memory lane. I was so excited when I got that call. I was teaching and coaching in Montgomery County, and at that time, Oliver Purnell was the head coach there, and he called me on a Saturday. I remember it clearly now. And he called me, he said, I heard about you and I need you. And I said, as you all get older, you move on in your profession, you'll get a lot of calls. You get a lot of emails, you get a lot of text messages. Some are blind calls, meaning you don't know the person, you don't know the company. But this was a blind call, but it was also a call to come home. I had spent 8 years at Clemson, and we always use the word, destination job, just destination location, destination visit. but Clemson was always a destination location for me. And so being born and raised in South Carolina, attending Clemson University, being a double Tiger, when he called, that was an easy yes for me. And so, again, I've spent a career fixing things. So I tell folks the tough jobs are warm and welcoming to me. In my opinion, anything that's easy, it's really not worth it. Anything you've got to work on, it actually, to me, it builds character.
And when speaking on how it sounded you wanted to take that job, one thing I wanted to ask you was, what is the type of impact that you desire to have on student athletes and youth in general?
Well, my gift, my talent is translating terms, translating experiences, connecting people. We can get into the weeds of learning how to learn. We get into the weeds of understanding math. I still do that now. I volunteer with our local Army recruiting station over at the Georgia Square Mall. So I still have my hands in it, but it's not the point to encourage people to be perfectionists. It's the point to encourage people to be who they are. So every individual, in my opinion, every individual is uniquely made. So you have to find out early and often what's your gifts, what's your talent, and what do you want to be your treasures. So we do understand gifts and talents. Your treasures are your experiences. Your treasures are the things that are sacred to you. Your treasures are your opportunities where you find value. It's not anyone else. It's not about a paycheck. It's not about silver and gold. It's about what you cherish. What's your fuel?
So when it came to working with the athletes at Clemson University, were there ever any issues dealing with the kid, like the students there, like maybe they weren't keeping up with their grades, they weren't showing up at practice or anything like that?
That's part of it.
How would you deal with that issue compared to anyone else?
I dealt with it directly. I dealt with it intentionally. Our very first meeting, I reminded them I didn't have any 18, 19, 20-year-old friends. And this was business. And I immediately started pouring into them that I can't care more than they care about their own success. So to answer your question, that was my motivation. That was
your method.
My method. And I wasn't going to coddle them. I wasn't going to celebrate their athletic success without any academic success. But when they made an A or they passed a test, we celebrated like it was 81,000 people cheering for them.
Thank you, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great question. Oh, that's a good one.
Excellent question.
That's a great question.
You are listening to Education Matters, where great questions get asked and answered.
My name is Jarrell Green, and joining me are my co-hosts,
Joshua Henderson.
Alan Green.
Tyson Vaughn.
Samaya Stone.
Before we continue today's show, we'll have Alan Green with our health facts.
Companionship is good for the heart. Having quality connections and social supports can increase happiness and longevity. Blue zones, the regions of the world where a higher than usual number of people live much longer than the global average shows that people who are socially active and integrated into their communities live longer lives. This has been your Health Fact, sponsored by Drug Free Athens.
And then we'll have Samaya with our word of the week.
Thank you. The word of the week for this week is lucid. Lucid means clear or readily understood. Lucid used in the sentence is he is able to recognize his wife in his lucid moments. And that has been your word of the week for this week.
Thank you, Samaya. Now, Mr. Robinson, we were talking a little bit more about how it was dealing with students who didn't really meet the demands you set for them academically and athletically. What do you think of the modern day student athlete and how things have been going or how things go in terms of, getting accepted into these big name schools and playing ball and all of that?
And how they've changed since years back.
Yeah, I think every decade, every 10 years, our country, we have a census. And so I think that's a good measuring rod for culture and climate. It gives us a chance to recognize that things do change. They may not be eliminated, and I'd say change in terms of evolve. So the modern day, in my opinion, the modern day student athlete has many opportunities, more opportunities than they've ever had today. With the change of name, image, and likeness, NIL, with the transfer portal, they've got choices after committing and after attending a college or university. They can transfer out with no penalty. The opportunity to brand themselves, which that 20 years ago that meant something totally different, but now they can brand themselves. They've got more creative ability for the name. They've got more opportunities for their likeness. They've got more chances to promote themselves, and we can debate for several hours if that's good for collegiate sports, if that's good for 18, 19, 20-year-olds to manage their message. So we can debate hours on that, but the opportunity's there. It's here. It's not going away anytime soon, if ever. But I think the student, in my opinion, the student athlete today, they've got a lot on their plate in terms of growing up faster and faster. We were talking during our break about social media, and your generation, you only know social media. So print media is historic. It's historic to you, archaic. But I came up in a generation of print media, and if it wasn't in your local news, state news, or USA Today, New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, it didn't exist. But now, with a tweet or a Instagram shot, a YouTube clip, you can either be famous, you can be hated, you can be a hero, or you can be a villain within minutes. And not only your neighborhood or your school or your friends or your family finds out, in minutes, the world finds out. And so that, to me, that's a lot.
So you mentioned a lot of good and bad when it came to that. So the good, from what I've heard from you, is they get a lot more opportunities, a lot more endorsements, sponsorships. They get their name out there. That can be a good or a bad thing on its own. But do you think that with these responsibilities, with players like, let me take for example, well, let me ask you, what's a player that comes to mind that you know of who is young and who's young enough that has been getting that who got that opportunity? Maybe like a Zion Williamson.
Yeah.
Or
let's stay with him for a minute. You guys are very familiar with him, and he is a South Carolina guy too. So we'll shout out to him, South Carolina guy. But the pressures that amount for someone of that magnitude, if you can imagine every move, we about a decade ago, and definitely 5 years ago, in the industry of sports, we started to mesh sports with entertainment. And you see now at the ESPYs, you see now at a lot of the Grammys, you see sports and entertainment intertwined now. So not only do they date, not only do they party together, they do business together. So you saw the Super Bowl where Jay-Z is now hired by the NFL to manage halftime shows, pregame shows. So there's a meshing of sports and entertainment only because it's visible. It's very, very visible. So you've got these two industries meshing, and you see it on the tennis level where mental health is huge. Golf is huge, and not only just tennis and golf, but any sport that is cerebral, which are most sports, you've got to have a game plan. You got to have a strategic plan. It's taxing. It's mentally and emotionally taxing. So to sum up some of those benefits, and the catch 22 is there's high reward, but there's also high risk. So with that high risk comes the emotional and the mental toughness you'll have to have, and that hasn't changed over generations. But again, I just can't imagine how visible your every move, your every message, your every play is magnified now.
Very interesting. Now, I have a quick question to ask, and that is, what is your ideal definition of a student athlete? And do you feel your idea of a student athlete still exists in modern times?
Yeah. So I think it's more prevalent now. I think it's more pronounced now with the increasing admission levels to get into college and universities now, with the GPAs, your core classes, your IB programs. The standards are so high to get into college and college now. So you have to have the ability to compete academically at the high level, and then the visibility to be a high-level student athlete now. The opportunity is we talked about, 18 years old and you're a field goal kicker, and if you miss that game-winning field goal in the championship game, not only do you have your university or your college, upset, you have people around the world upset because they're watching this live now. So the student athlete is probably more. I would have a capital S and a capital A for student athlete. Before, 30 years ago, it was kind of like the cool thing to say. When I was coming up in the 90s, we would say scholar athlete because it separated you from just a group. I was in honors classes. But again, I was talented at 10, just different things that you get categorized if you were really smart and really athletic. But even now, you've got to compete with the best and the brightest in your classroom, and you have to compete with the best and the most athletically talented on the field, on your playing field.
Okay, interesting.
You mentioned mental health not too long ago, and what we were just talking about, like different moments where it's like where you mentioned like missing like a game-winning something. So you have like the university and college matters, your fans, coaches, all kinds of people. How do you feel like that affects student athletes' mental health? Like, how do you feel like their mental health is affected by situations and things like that?
Well, I think that's anyone with pressure. I had a moment this morning logging in, working from home, logging in, and I could not log in. So there's a level of anxiety kicked in with me because at that moment, I couldn't perform my job. And so if I can't perform my job, I feel inadequate. If I feel inadequate, it reflects into the next meeting. And so it's a vicious cycle that rotates through. And when I speak about the mental health piece, again, this generation is cultural in terms of, and it's cross-cultural. It's more awareness now than ever before. When I was 10 years old, and it was be tough it out. The world didn't change at that moment, but that was the message. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I have to be careful that I don't say tough it out. I have to ask her, okay, what troubles you? How are you feeling? What made you feel this way? How can I help you? So we've got to reach back and extend a helping hand, just because it's culturally it's different now. And again, it's more talk. I mean, think about it. It used to be taboo to say, "I don't feel well. I'm tired." You ask your grandparents; they don't understand the word tired. I mean, we had to work for water. Think about it. We had to work for water. Like, you went outside with your grandparents, you chopped some wood, you cut some grass, and you wouldn't dare say, can I have well, we didn't have bottled water back then. Can I have a cup of water? They felt they was wasting water. So now, you ask somebody to go work outside, and I don't know how many of y'all work outside, how many of y'all cut grass? How many of y'all know what a lawnmower is? So you expect cold bottle of water, snacks, a break. You need to check your phone. You need to listen to some music while you're working. So all those things didn't exist when I was your age and younger. So my generation has to recognize that, and we've got to make sure we support whatever you all need, because we need you all. At the end of the day, we need you all to be successful for several reasons. We need you all to be successful, but we got to meet people where they are, and we got to be better listeners, and we got to be better learners.
Another thing I'd like to go back with you, we were talking about the maturity level and whether or not players are responsible enough to move on to the next level. Are you aware of Overtime or Slam or any of those magazines that cover high school players?
Yes.
So a lot of those cover, like players like, I don't know if you're aware of their names, like Mikey Williams or Ronnie James, LeBron James' son. They get a lot of exposure a lot earlier than players back in your day do. And even another option in terms of like publicity, you've got players now who skip college and go to the pros straight, like the NBA's G League or going international. So I want to get your opinion on whether or not they are at that maturity level or not to be getting that exposure and taking those jumps at that early stage.
I think that's a two answer piece where physically they are built for it. So kids are training at 8, 9, 10 years old. 8, 9, 10-year-olds. We were climbing trees. We were playing tag and chase. In the summer we had red light, green light. We had freeze tag. And I know y'all have to Google these games. I know y'all don't play them. Hopscotch. We just play games outside, right? These kids now are specializing at 10, meaning they're training, they're in a gym, they're in a weight room, they're on a track, they're on a field. So athletically, they are more advanced than the generation prior to them. So I get that part. But at the end of the day, they're still 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. And a quick quiz question for you all. Science says your frontal lobe finally develops at what age?
25.
25. Very good. Very good. So you're saying, we science tells us that, and we want a 17 and 18-year-old to make a decision that a 25 or 30-year-old would make. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question in terms of physically boys and girls are built just totally different than they were 10, 20 years ago. But mentally and emotionally, they still have to grind. I still call them kids because they're kids.
Thank you, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great question. Oh, that's a good one.
Excellent question.
That's a great question.
You are listening to Education Matters, where great questions get asked and answered.
Welcome back to Education Matters. You're still here with Samaya Stone, and joining me are my co-hosts.
Fredrell Green.
Joshua Henderson.
Colin Green.
Kyson Vaughn.
And we are still interviewing Mr. Melvin Robinson, but before we hop into our third segment, we will have our History Fact 5 found.
On July 11, 1804, Vice President Aaron Burr, a mortally wounded former Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton during a pistol duel in Wheat Holland, New Jersey. Hamilton died the next day in 1859. Big Ben, the great bell inside of the famous London clock tower, chimed for the first time. This has been your History Fact, sponsored by you Radio
Thank you for that. So, there are a few questions that I have to ask you. Here's one. What are some of your experiences when it comes to dealing with the student athletes?
Some of my experiences are it's focused on 4 of those experiences. One would be from academic development, so helping them with their schoolwork, making sure that not only that they're eligible, that they are performing academically at the highest level that they possibly can. 2 is life skills. What we talk about developing holistically as a person. We talked earlier during our break about going through your stages of development. So honoring that, pushing that through, making sure they understand what that means. 3 is career development, helping them enhance their job skills. Eventually, as you all know, your body will fail. So as an athlete, you're depending on your body to provide every opportunity you have. Eventually, and this is science, your body will fail. So now you've got to depend on your mind. So you have to set up for the next phase of your life. And the 4th piece is wellness. So spending time, and I call them kids, because again, I have a son older than most of the kids I work with. Focusing on their wellness, their health and their wellness. So we talked about in our earlier segment about mental and emotional support. So providing a listening ear and a helping hand to it.
Following up on that, what are some personal experiences you've had that you cherish in memory with some student athletes from like any school you've been to, like Clemson or Maryland? Like, what are some of the most memorable moments you've had where like it may have been something that they were dealing with personally that you had to help them with? Or
So I would it's so many. So I'll 3 stops I've had: Clemson, Maryland, and University of Georgia. I'll have those 3 moments and just generalize that experience. I don't want to get into for confidentiality purposes. I don't want to get into a lot of details. But in Maryland, there was 2 kids, came from 2 different areas. There was Juan Dixon. He was a All-American that year, Baltimore kid, and he ended up losing his parents as a teenager. He went on to college, had really good success, and he's coaching now. So sparing the details in between, he grew up and now he's giving back. The second example at the University of Maryland is I call him a kid. He was a kid at the time, Chris Wilcox. Chris was one of the most athletically gifted human beings I've ever been around. And Chris spent several years in the NBA. And a couple of years ago, I was walking the grounds at the Masters in Augusta, and the 6'10" guy walked up on me. He says, "Coach Mel." And I turned and I looked up, and the sun's in my face, and this guy he's so tall. And I said, "Well, hell, I said, heck, he's not a golfer." And so I looked up, and it was Chris Wilcox. And this guy had evolved from a sophomore that year, winning a national championship with that team at Maryland, and watching Chris grow up. And just this past spring, one of my college buddies, bumped into him in a business meeting and said, "Hey, we said we were from Clemson," and Chris mentioned that he knew a guy from Clemson, and we all laughed and said it's probably the same doggone guy, and it's Melvin Robinson. So glad to hear Chris doing really well, Wilcox doing really good, well business-wise in North Carolina, giving back to his community. So those are the 2 moments or as personal moments at Maryland. I remember Clemson. We had a guy that was the first architect basketball player at Clemson, and Cliff Hammonds. He's from Cairo, Georgia. And at that time, I had no idea where Cairo, Georgia was, so I was at Clemson. And I've since spent some time in Cairo, Georgia, now living in Georgia for 15 years. And Cliff would leave practice and spend the night in the architect's lab. And he had to put together designs and he had to put together models, and he had to make them out of. So you in architect school, you have to choose your materials, whether it's wood, cardboard, plastic, whatever material you want to use, but you have to make these architectural models. And so Chris would always use wood, and I found out why I use wood in Cairo, Georgia, just the lumber industry down here as well. And I didn't fully appreciate not only how good he was as a person and as a basketball player, and especially as a student athlete, as a student, is how much he cared for. He came from a big family, and he always had time when his family came in town to see his games. So Cliff Hammonds brings back really good memories and experiences at Clemson. And here recently at Georgia, I've had countless, from Chris Barnes to Jeremy Price, to Antavius Coates and C.J. Bird, but most recently, N'Kobe Dean. I mentored him for 3 years, and he was the Buckets Award winner this past year in the national championship team. He was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles, but watching N'Kobe, and he's majoring in mechanical engineering, so there's a common thread here. We talk about student athletes and what they can do on the field, but especially what they can do off the field. Watching him balance his academic work with being a middle linebacker on this #1 defense, and having the respect in the locker room and the respect in the classroom and the respect of his dean of the College of Engineering, I just tip my hat to all the things and all the time he had and all the time he didn't have, because he had a commitment and he served his purpose and he served his term well. So
That's interesting. So another question that I wanted to ask, in case if you ever retire, what sort of advice would you give to someone if they were in your position or want to be a successful athlete director?
Well, good question. Well, I guess in a sense, I've kind of retired since March of this past year. I transitioned out of collegiate athletics and went over to the private sector. I'm now the director of business development for AECOM. It's a global architect and engineering firm. My role is to translate terms to architect and engineers. The second phase of my opportunity is to really promote the company in terms of what we can do, what we're good at. And so I felt very comfortable in that role, and it was a hard transition in terms of leaving college athletics. I spent over 2 decades in college athletics, but we always say timing matters, just like education matters. Timing matters in your life as well. So as I look towards retirement, and retirement to me is having to work. Retirement to me is not stop working, but having to work. So knowing that my window to have to work was between 10 and 15 years, if I'm granted 10 or 15 years on this earth, I wanted to maximize that time. So, but I didn't want to miss moments with my kids either. So unfortunately in college athletics, or any parts of the industry, it costs you a lot of time away, a lot of time at work, and it's rare that you can really have a well-rounded experience at home. So I made the conscious decision in March to transition away from college athletics and to get into the private industry. We all know the private industry versus the public industry, the earning opportunities are greater. So if the earning opportunities are greater, you have a shorter window to do that. You heard my window was 10 to 15 years, not 20 or 30 years. So all that had to play out, and it's playing out really well. I'm in a good space with this company now. But the advice I would give any young person trying to get into, whether it's college athletics, pro athletics, the entertainment industry, again, they are sisters, athletics and entertainment share the same attention span, they share the same similar fans, they share the same stage. Make sure you're comfortable in that space. And what that means is understand the industry. So you have customers and you have consumers. So the customers want a certain thing, and the customers are going to pay for a certain thing. Excuse me, and your consumers are going to be the viewers. I'm quite sure you guys for your station, you have customers and you have consumers. So you have to figure that out. Okay. And the last C of that is what you can't control any of that. You can flood the market, you can give, but you can't control the outcome. So once you figure that out, and figure out your space in that place, then you can make a decision if you want to continue to serve that industry, or transition out.
Thank you. We'll be right back after these messages.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great question. Oh, that's a good one.
Excellent question.
That's a great question.
You are listening to Education Matters, where great questions get asked and answered.
3, 2.
Welcome back to Education Matters, the official voice of youth. My name is Jadrell Green, and joining me are my co-hosts,
Joshua Anderson.
Fallon Green.
Bryson Vaughn.
Samaya Stone.
Now, Mr. Robinson, we never really got into how exactly you got the position of Assistant Athletic Director at UGA. Can you tell us how you got there?
Well, I came to University of Georgia with the hopes and dreams I was going to be one of the next great basketball coaches in college athletics. I was hired as a director of basketball operations, where I manage day-to-day operations, travel, recruiting for University of Georgia men's basketball team. And in 2008, we won the SEC championship. We were on a roll coming back. In 2009, our staff was released because at the end of the day, we did not win enough games. And so I had to evolve and recreate myself, recreate my career, because I really liked Athens. And that was in 2009, and it's 2022, and I'm still here. So I sat down with a gentleman by the name of Charlie Whittemore, who was at the time the Assistant Athletic Director for Facility and Operations. And he had shared his story with me and how he had to evolve and change his career and transition away from coaching into more athletic administration. I told him I too desired that as a career path. And so I spent 3 to 4 years kind of learning, listening and learning, following him, completing small projects, really growing the facility operations unit, really pushed some technological advances through the unit. And years later, I was promoted to the Assistant Athletic Director for Facility and Operations, where at that time I was managing capital projects, non-capital projects, managing millions of dollars in facility upgrades, and then managing day-to-day over 50 full-time staff, over 200 for UGA game day, 6 Saturdays a year. For a basketball game, about 25 game ops, and really had our hand on every athletic facility at the University of Georgia.
It must have been a different ballpark getting into all the, working on technology and building landscapes and stuff compared to what you were doing before, like when it was just, working on making sure kids were up with their grades and on time in practice. How challenging was it to, go from one field to another?
Very good question, and I've been asked that question over the years. How do you transition from your primary responsibility is the health care and wellness of student athletes, and now you're working primarily with adults and fans? Well, I always tell people are people. So student athlete, usually 18, 19, 20 years old. A fan, usually 25, 26, 27-year-old, a donor. So the age at that moment doesn't matter when you really care about people. So in short, you treat your family just like you would treat somebody that's a friend. At that point I learned that the Bulldog Nation is the Bulldog Nation. it's student athletes, it's coaches, it's staff, it's fans, it's donors. It's those folks that cheer from the radio and cheer from the TV and cheer from the stadium. So the Bulldog Nation is one family.
Speaking of switching fields as well as switching jobs, in all the facilities that you worked at, how did you kind of reestablish yourself or work to make it feel like home in a sense?
Well, another very good question. The way I'm wired, and I believe people are wired the way they are, they just have to accept it. The way I'm wired, you heard me tell my story where I transitioned from engineering to education in college, and because I love people. So to answer that question, again, moving from primarily being responsible for student athletes and moving into more adult staff, coaches, fans, and now we're getting into structures where it's at Sanford Stadium or Stegman Coliseum or Foley Field. It's that to me, that building, it may sound a little strange, but to me the building was a person. So I had to be an advocate, I had to be an advisor, I had to be an encourager for that building. That building needed maintenance, that building needed paint, that building needed carpet, that building needed lights, that building needed ceiling tile. So no different where a person needed things, the building needed things. And so the way I'm built, I like to give. So now becoming a counselor to an advisor to a director, now as assistant AD for facility operations, now I need to be a steward. I need to be a caretaker of that building, of that structure.
So what is it that you think the people that hired you at AECOM saw in you from your experience as an assistant athletic director that made them want to have you work for them?
Well, I think they asked around, and there's no secrets in the industry. There was no secrets in college athletics, and so I think they took their time. From what they've told me, they took their time to investigate who I was as a person, who I was as an employee, and I believe that I matched some of the desires they have. Looking back at it, it's still short term, but the respect level I had in the industry, I think that was a plus for them. The opportunities I provided, staff morale, the expertise of being budget conscious, fiscally responsible, all those things are pluses. But again, those are not new to my life. I tell you when I was 6 years old, what I was doing. I told you when I was 10, 12, 15, 16, 18, 25 years old, what I was doing. So it's so very important as we close out this segment in the show of Education Matters that your listeners, especially your young listeners, understand that everything matters. Education matters. Your occupation matters. Your faith matters. Your family matters. Your emotions matter. What you say matters. What you do matters. What you tweet matters. Everything matters. And unfortunately, you don't always get a do-over. So when you get the chance, first foot forward. When you get your chance, and you heard me say in our break, every opportunity is an interview. So make sure you're sharp. Make sure you're paying attention. Make sure that if there's a chance for you to get better, to be better, to grow, to learn, the first thing you got to do is listen. And you listen with your eyes. You listen with your ears. You listen with your spirit. So.
All right, and as we come towards the end of our segment, we have to ask you the essential question that we ask all our guests, which is, why does education matter to you?
Oh, education matters to me because it was the backbone of everything I've done in my life. From kindergarten to Little League baseball, to middle school basketball, to high school cross country, to being a captain of a team, being a leader in a group, to helping my community, helping my neighborhood, encouraging my family, my friends, being a father, whatever title that I was given, whatever title I was gifted, to honor that title. But it was always based on education. That was the backbone of everything. And I'm thankful and blessed that I've embraced the opportunity to be a lifelong learner. So I don't know it all. I recognize that. So I continue to listen and to learn so I can get complete understanding. And that is the reason why education matters to me.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, for coming on our show today and being a part of our family. Because believe it or not, you are from this experience. And thank you for listening to Education Matters, the official voice of youth. Education Matters is sponsored by Ellison's Professional Services and your local internet station, U Radio Athens. If you missed any portion of the show or would like to hear it again, it can be heard Monday at 10 a.m. or Thursday at 5:30. Education Matters can also be heard on our YouTube channel, Education Matters Network. Education Matters is a part of the High School Completion Initiative, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.